Welcome back to Stu Structures. We're here for the final video of building Sparky's house, so stay tuned. So welcome back to Stu Structures. I am Mark Stewart, and in this video we are going to finish building Sparky's house. We have a lot of detail stuff. We have the deck on the back of the house to add to it. Some of the windows had came unglued. The glue just didn't adhere really well in these windows. Most times I cut windows to the size of the frame, or but bigger than the window, and I glue them to the wall behind the window. In this one I tried to cut them exactly to the size of the window and inset them into the panes. And I don't know if there's a difference in the plastics or what, but they just didn't adhere really well, so some of them have popped out, so I've got to go back and replace some of those. So anyway, we're just going to jump into this process and get started, so let's go. The first thing we really need to work on here, or I'm going to work on here, is this front porch. And in the last episode, most of the handrails and stuff around here were done, and I had some green stuff underneath this end here that I've got to come back and still sand a little and paint on. But one thing that's still missing in the front, as you step down off the front porch, is a stoop, a concrete little stoop out there in front. So I'm just digging through my scrap, balsa wood and stuff, and I came up with a square piece that I could glue on here and turn into a stoop, and just cut it to length and glued it into place. And then just mixing up a little bit of paint here that looks similar to concrete, and this isn't going to be perfect by any means, but it's close enough to concrete that it's fine by me. When I touch up that end of the porch with the brown paint, I'll come back here and just touch up some of the overlap in the paint that I put on here as well. And basically, other than taking care of this green stuff down here at the end, that's pretty much the front porch in place at this point in time. Now on the back side, there's also a stoop that comes out of this door that goes into the garage. So, I just go ahead and glue a piece in place and paint it the same as I did the others. And in the last episode, I had cut these deck panels to place, and we had put the boards, scribed the boards into the top, and I just came back and put the gray paint on them to the proper color, and now I've got to figure out how high to raise this off the ground. So I'm just putting these on the base, and then using this wood to find the right height that comes up to the bottom of the sliding glass door, so I have the proper height on it. And then I just cut the pieces that go underneath and start gluing them into place where they will support the deck at the proper height, and then I'll come back and glue it on eventually. So I just go through the process, and you can see this one small piece. I let the pieces run wild so that I can tie it into that long front piece of the deck also, and just put basically supports all the way around, every side that it needs to be. And then I started gluing this small piece onto the building at first, and then come back and overlap this other piece on there, and then just put some weights on them to make sure that nothing was going to move around. They were going to stay where I wanted them, and just glued everything together and into place onto the building. And just now we've got some painting to touch up and the bottom edges of it to come back and paint. But once that's done, that's the basic deck in place. And it looks respectable for what it is there. But the deck also has some handrails around it, and you can see things here. Now the one deck that has the tall privacy fence on doesn't have handrails, so I'm leaving that open for the time being, and just coming and putting this decking in around the rest of the deck. And I'm not going to worry about these little light boxes or whatever on top of the post, but I want the basic handrails in place. And these pictures just give you an idea of what I'm working with here. These are probably 1.5 inch uprights in the middle, and each of these panels had several of those. So I go through my wood once again, and I didn't have anything to scrap box. So I figured out the drawing and about how many handrails. The top and bottom handrails are 2x4s, and then, like I said, probably 1.5 inches and 3.5 inch posts. And with not having the wood in my scrap box, I just went through all my new stuff stuff, and I have 2x4s, and I don't have 1.5 by 1.5s, which would be small, so I'm just going to use basically what's a 3x3 in HO scale, which is a little large, but I think it'll work. So I went ahead and cut the posts and all the upright slats to do all the panels all at the same time. You know, and cutting this wood, Northeastern, you know, I've been buying their wood for years and years and years as scale lumber. And to glue all this together, this is just the type of super glue I use, and you can watch me go through the process. But the wood that Northeastern sells anymore, it's not as clean as what it used to be. And you know, after putting this almost all together, I'm kind of thinking that, you know, I probably should have done this with styrene. It would have looked much nicer, and you know, just would have been a better look. The wood's just a little rough looking, and the plastic, it was plastic handrail that was on the deck, so you know, plastic looks more like plastic than wood does, just like wood looks more like wood than plastic does. But anyway, I was already, you know, headed in this direction. So, you know, I just came back and went through this process, and you can just see me here as I, you know, putting all these little stanchions in place. I just basically used this rubber mat that I have on my table as a square, and just put the bottom 2x4s on there just slightly off the deck, and then come back, and you know, this is kind of in the center of that 4x4, so I put this other piece of wood under the 2x2s to keep them, you know, vertically the same as the fence post, so when I come back and do the top rail, it'll all be in the center of the post at the center, as well as it was the bottom where I glued on that lower piece. And you know, it's just what I'm normally doing with most of these. I was doing them one at a time, and then what I did was came back and just did every other one, so that I was leaving a gap between them that I could come back and fill in later, and not bump them because they're close together. So I just did every other one and then came back and filled the odd ones in after that. And here you can see on these small ones, I'm just coming apart, and I'm just sticking ends of everything into the super glue and then putting it together. I do like this type of Loctite super glue. It's the gel form. It gives me a little more time to work with things, and it stays wet on my palette there, so I can keep dipping into it for a long period while I'm working on these. And you know, you can see slight angles and stuff here. This is just not as clean as I would have liked it, but you know, I think it'll serve the purpose, and these handrails are together. There is one more section that we have to hand make, but after I do this, I go ahead and pre-paint them, because I want to glue them into place, and I don't want to have to come back and, you know, where this white meets the gray decking. I just want a nice clean edge, so if I pre-paint them, that's going to stay nice even once I glue them into place. So, you know, I have to move them around my tweezers a couple times to get them painted, and then I come back and start painting all this. Now, there is still, you know, other touch-up painting. You can see in that back corner, there's some trim along this side of that upper roof. There's other things I got to come back and touch up, but I'm just going to go ahead and get these in place for the time being. You can see this one window that popped out in the sliding glass door on the right-hand side, too, that I got to come back and replace. But basically, this is all 4 of those panels glued into place. Now, this other one, I purposely did not pre-build it because I wanted to make sure just to build it in place so that I, you know, didn't have something too short or too long before I glued it onto the deck. So I just cut this extra post that I needed, paint it white, and then come back and, you know, with a straight edge between the 2 posts, and just put it right in the middle and spacing between those 2 posts, and go ahead and glue that stanchion into place. And then the rest of this I'm just going to stick build into place. So, you know, I just hold the 2x4 material up next to where I need it and mark it and take it aside and cut it, then bring the 2x4 back with some glue on it and glue it into place. And then, you know, just I debated on which direction to go with this next part, but I just decided to come through and glue all the stanchions on individually upright. And you know, I'm just using my eyeballs and looking at different angles to make sure they're kind of aligned and everything is right. You know, I don't have a little tiny square that I can set in there. I could probably make one. But you know, this isn't something, it's on the back side of the house, so I'm assuming that if Sparky uses it on his layout, the back side you're probably not going to see that much either anyway. But you know, I wish this had been cleaner, a little cleaner done than what it is, but I think it'll serve the purpose. Once I get this paint on them, it'll look okay. Now, one thing I didn't notice holding and looking at it from the angle I did, when I glued this deck to the house, there was actually some separation between the house and the deck itself. And I don't know how this escaped me till now, but from the side view you can see this a lot better. So I'm just going to cut a real thin wedge of wood and paint it and stick it in there. You know, I just threw this paint together, so the one when I repainted it and stuck it in there, which is in there and glued now, you can see it's just a little bit darker, but I'm just kind of gonna live with it. You know, and I came back once, you know, in the last video I was working on these roof vents and stuff, but here's a picture of the 3 of them glued into place. Now that lower one I've still got to straighten up just a little bit, but then once I come back and paint them and put the flashing around the main mast and everything, you know, the vents on top are kind of done at this point. Well, at least I thought they were done. I broke this one off handling the house, and this electric meter that I had made before, I'm just not quite good with that, so I'm just going to make another one. And I have this real thick plastic, so I'm just gluing 2 layers of this together and trimming off the sides to make this box. And I'm just doing the same thing with a clear Gorilla Glue and just putting a splotch of that on there to create the glass dome. And then I went and, I set that aside there and had some silver paint on it, but I grabbed some wire and I'm stripping some of it, and I'm going to use some of it, the thickness that it is, to come back. And it's just some wire I cut off of something at some point. But I'm also going to have to use some of these plastic dowels for some of the piping on the electrical work on the house as well. And you can see, that electrical box on this side of the house, but the next thing I'm going to start working on is the satellite dish on here. And, I just started going around looking for something I could make the dish out of. And, this plastic thing to the top right isn't quite right, but, I kind of like this. This is a watch lens. My dad was a watchmaker for years, and I have some cabinets that have glass in them. This one actually came out of a cabinet that I had bought for somebody years ago that had a bunch of little ones in it. So, all I had was angle, so I made these T-braces and glued some pieces together. I cut this small one to go ahead and glue on the back of that watch crystal as the mount that the dish would mount to. And I made another one of those, and here's some tubing, and I made a little reflector for the end for the collector that goes into the dish itself. And I made this angle wall bracket, cut that slot out of the center of it, and then just added this tubing in there. And I'm just bending this without heating it up. The one collector, I went ahead and glued this other tubing to and started bending it in place so that we can make a collector for the front of the dish. And I come back and glue that onto the bottom of the dish and the arm up to the T part that we mounted onto the dish, and add some extra piping between the two. And with some glue as filler and paint on this, it's not going to look too bad for something thrown together just in, a couple hours or something. And here it is with the first basic coat of paint on it. This is a little too dark. I got to come back and use a slightly lighter gray, but I need something that's a little darker than the siding. Okay, so I lied. This was not the last week of Sparky's house. I didn't end up with as much time this week as what I thought I would. The warmer weather has me working more in the nursery and stuff and getting stuff ready for spring, which I should have had a lot more done by this time, but the weather has kept me from doing it. But in any case, I'm going to change directions to some extent with my channel, and this is kind of the heads up. Starting next week, which we will finish Sparky's house. I've got stuff I've got to repair and things to work on. All the downspouts have to be manufactured and added onto the gutter system. There's some touch-ups here and there. There's still quite a few little things that I want to do. But in any case, we will finish it next week. And also, what I'm going to do with my channel from now on is I'm going to, I kind of mentioned this once before, but I'm going to start doing a week in the life of type of a thing. You know, I work on more than one project when I'm doing these types of things. I've always got things going on in the background. So I think from now on, what I'm going to do is just do a weekly blog on everything that I do during the week, which will include building buildings. I have some other projects I want to get started to add into next week's video as well. We will get Sparky's house finished next week, and you know, just head on into some other things as well. You know, some of the things I'm going into might not be scratch building. I am going to scratch build a couple of pieces of rolling stock, so to speak, and I'll go more into that next week and what I'm going to head on. I am going to work on those 2 local modules because some of the people down here locally want to have something as a model railroad. You know, I'm just going to build a couple of modules with some of the buildings that I have built, and I have a few more buildings to build to make a representative model of what the railroad would have been right after the turn of the century in 1900. So it'll be slightly past that time period. I'm not sure exactly. Some of these buildings started disappearing around that time period, but they you know, they just were an integral part of the history of this town. Belington was really a major railroad town at one time. There were 4 different railroads that met in Belington. And, you know, one of the major railroads, which had multiple railroads coming across the country, they did some surveying on the other side of the river from what became the B&O Railroad. And if they had made what they had planned to happen on the other side of the railroad, we would have been a major terminus here in Belington, West Virginia. The Gould family, I'm not sure if it was that family or one of the other major railroad families, but they had plans to come through. One of their lines would have came through here, and they only had 1 or 2 little lines to complete and finish to be able to have a monopoly from the west coast clear to the east coast. And if they hadn't been able to come through here and one other leg of their railroad, we would have been a major terminus here in Belington, West Virginia. But the family ended up going out of business. They just didn't have the money to take on the grandiose plans that they had, and it all fell through. I do have some blueprints of the surveys they did on the other side of the railroad and what they had planned to do in this area. But like I said, it just didn't happen. But in any case, Belington, you know, 4 railroads meeting in a little town is quite incredible for here. Belington was quite prestigious at one time. You know, we were considered, as when the Capitol burnt down one time in the state of West Virginia, Belington was actually considered as a state capital at one time. If you, you know, go circles out from Belington, and then you include the panhandles and all the weird shapes in West Virginia, Belington really is pretty close to the exact center of the state. But anyway, like the Gould family or whoever it was, their plans didn't come to fruition, and neither did the people here. You know, Charleston became the state capital, and you know, and it went in a different direction. But in any case, the money and the people and everything in Belington at the time, it was really a major city oncoming and growing. And anyway, I want to go ahead and build a couple of modules that they can use locally when they have major events here in the city. I want to put modules together to show people what some of our history was in Belington and a little bit about the railroads. I'm not going to go back to include the little tiny turntable that was here at one time, and there was a small engine house at one time for the Belington Northern Railroad, which was on the other side of the river. But, you know, I want to show enough and show some of these buildings that I've been doing so people can have an idea of what Billington was all about back in its heyday. We're kind of dwindling now, and it's kind of a lost cause in the town here now. I mean, we do have the Durbin and Greenbrier running the Taggart Flyer here out of Billington, West Virginia, in the yards down here. Some of you have seen my Boneyards video before. If you haven't, go back and look at that. But the equipment and everything here is constantly changing in the yard. So, you know, there is still some existence of a railroad here, but back in the day it was incredible. So anyway, we'll go more into that in the next video. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Come back and we'll finally do the reveal on Sparky's house and start into some other projects in different directions, and we'll go into more of that next week. So for the time being, happy model railroading.